Someone you love is gone. The body is still there, but the person has left. And you don't know what to do. You just stand there, looking at something that used to be someone. And your brain, this extraordinary complicated organ, goes completely blank. That feeling is not weakness. It is not confusion. It is something ancient, something written into your biology hundreds of thousands of years before anyone taught you how to grieve. And when you look at what your ancestors actually did in that moment, what they built, what they painted, what they carried, the real answer is far stranger than anything you were ever told. Because death didn't just terrify ancient humans, it transformed them. For most of recorded history, people assumed that ritual around death was a recent invention, something civilization invented, something religion introduced, a polished behavior layered on top of raw animal instinct. Scholars assumed that early humans, the ones who hunted with stone and slept under open sky, simply left their dead behind. That grief, in any recognizable form, was a modern luxury. They were wrong. In 2015, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger made a discovery deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa that shattered that assumption. Hidden in a chamber so narrow that only the smallest researchers could squeeze through, they found bones, hundreds of them. Belonging to a species they named Homo naledi, a creature with a brain barely a third the size of yours, with curved climbing fingers and a skull that looked nothing like a modern human face. This thing was not us. Not by any stretch. And yet, in that chamber, unreachable by accident, the bones were arranged, repeatedly, deliberately. Lee Berger and his team concluded that Homo naledi was intentionally placing its dead in that cave, not dragging them, not abandoning them, carrying them, down through the dark into the earth. Your brain does something instinctive when it hears that. It asks, why? And that question is the beginning of everything that makes you human. The oldest confirmed burial site ever found belongs to Homo sapiens, but only barely. At School Cave in Israel, archaeologists uncovered graves dating back 130,000 years. The dead were laid in specific positions. Objects were placed beside them, a boar's jawbone, a shell, pigment that had been deliberately ground and applied. These weren't accidents of geology. Something intentional happened here. Something that required time, effort, and most importantly, a reason. Archaeologist April Noel, who has spent decades studying the cognitive evolution of early humans, argues that burial behavior is one of the clearest windows we have into the inner life of our ancestors. When a creature begins treating its dead differently from a fallen tree or a discarded tool, something has shifted in its mind. It has begun to understand that the person who died was not just an object. It has developed, in some form, a theory of the self. And if the self matters, if it matters enough to place beside it a jawbone, a flower, a handful of red ochre, then death becomes something other than an ending. It becomes a problem. That is where everything gets strange. Because across every continent, in every era, humans reached similar conclusions about what needed to happen after death. The body needed to be treated. The spirit needed to be guided. The community needed to witness. The details changed wildly, but the underlying structure did not. And that uniformity is not coincidence. It is biology. Anthropologist Barbara King, in her work on animal grief, documented something that complicates the neat line we draw between human mourning and animal behavior. Elephants return to the bodies of their dead. They touch the bones with their trunks. They stand in silence. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying deceased infants for days, weeks, even months, grooming them, sleeping beside them, refusing to let go. In 2018, a killer whale named Tahlequah carried her dead calf through the Pacific Ocean for 17 days. 17 days. She pushed it through the water, kept it at the surface, swam 1,000 miles with the body of something that was no longer alive. She was not confused about whether it was dead. She knew, and she carried it anyway. What ancient humans added to that raw grief was structure, procedure, meaning. The Neanderthals, your closest evolutionary cousins, gone now for roughly 40,000 years, appear to have buried their dead with deliberate care. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologist Ralph Selecki excavated a Neanderthal burial in the 1960s and found dense clusters of pollen surrounding the skeleton. He argued the body had been laid on a bed of wildflowers. That interpretation has been debated, but other Neanderthal burials flexed into fetal positions, covered in ochre found alongside tools and animal bones, suggest something more than abandonment. Whether they mourned in the way you do is impossible to know, but they did something. They stopped. They chose. And that choice cost them something: time, energy, risk. In a world where a missed hunt meant starvation, spending hours preparing a gravesite was not a trivial act. It meant something mattered more than survival in that moment. It meant the dead person still held weight. Your body carries that logic today. When someone you love dies, you feel a compulsion to do something. Arrange flowers, choose the right clothes, write the right words, plan the service. Make it right. That compulsion is not cultural conditioning alone. It is, at its core, the same impulse that drove a Homo naledi down into a dark cave with a body it refused to leave behind. The specific rituals diverged in spectacular ways. In ancient Egypt, death was an administrative process. The body was preserved carefully, technically, obsessively, because the Egyptians believed the soul needed its physical anchor. Without the body, the spirit could not navigate the afterlife. So they removed the organs, dried the flesh with natron salt, wrapped it in hundreds of meters of linen, and placed it inside nested coffins, inside sealed chambers stocked with food, jewelry, tools, and servants. The dead needed to be ready. They had places to be. In ancient Mesopotamia, the dead were buried beneath the floors of houses. You slept above your ancestors. You walked over them every morning. They were not removed from life, they were folded back into it. Invisible, but present, still part of the household. When archaeologist Leonard Woolley excavated the royal tombs of Ur in the 1920s, he found something that stopped him cold. Dozens of servants, soldiers, and attendants had been buried alive alongside the royals, or had willingly walked into the tombs and died there. They believed, apparently without coercion, that following their ruler into death was not a tragedy, it was a privilege. In Tibet, a tradition existed called sky burial. The body was carried to a high plateau and left for vultures. This was not abandonment or disrespect. It was considered the most generous final act, returning the body to the sky, feeding the living, completing a cycle. In parts of Indonesia, the Toraja people mummify their dead and keep them in the house for weeks, months, sometimes years, treating them as sleeping, not gone, continuing to feed them and speak to them while preparing for an elaborate ceremony that may take years to fund. The dead are family. They stay until the living are ready to let them go. In the highlands of Madagascar, there is a practice called fama dihana, the turning of the bones. Every few years, families dig up the remains of their ancestors, wrap them in fresh cloth, dance with the bodies, share food and music and stories, and then return them to the earth. It is joyful. It is raucous. It is, to an outside observer, almost incomprehensible. But to the families who practice it, it is obvious. You don't stop loving someone because they died. Why would you stop visiting them? What unites all of it, the Egyptian mummies, the Neanderthal ochre, the Tibetan plateau, the Torajan house, the Madagascan dance, is something psychologist Thomas Attig calls continuing bonds. The modern Western model of grief tends to frame mourning as a process that ends. You grieve, you heal, you move on, you let go. But that model is historically unusual. For most of human history, in most cultures on Earth, the goal of mourning was not to sever the connection with the dead, it was to transform it, to find a way to keep the relationship alive in a new form. Your ancestors understood something that took modern psychology a very long time to rediscover. The dead do not leave. They change address. And the living from the very beginning built rituals to follow them there, to knock on the door, to leave food on the step, to say, I know you moved, I know you're different now, but you are still mine. That is what grief is. Not confusion, not dysfunction, not a problem to be solved. It is loyalty expressed across an impossible distance. Tonight, if you find yourself doing something that feels irrational in the face of loss, if you talk to someone who can't hear you, or keep a object that has no practical use, or feel compelled to mark a date no one else remembers, understand what that is. It is not a malfunction. It is hundreds of thousands of years of human beings refusing to accept that love has a deadline. It is a homo naledi, squeezing through the dark, carrying someone they couldn't leave behind. It is the oldest thing you do, and someone you love is still worth doing it for.